Hi everyone, my name is Isabel Sandoval. I'm the filmmaker behind Lingua Franca, and I am very excited to be moderating this Q&A about this wonderful new short. It's tender and introspective. It's about a trans woman in search of her childhood home and family after running away several years prior, is confronted with the gentrification of her neighborhood. With all her old Pat's home gone, she wanders the streets, falling in and out of memories of her family, her early transition, and a drug habit she can't seem to shake. And the title of this wonderful new short is The Lights Are On, No One's Home, which had its world premiere at BFI Flair and has screened at Outfest, as well as the Palm Springs Shorts Fest. And I'm proud to introduce the filmmaker, Faye Ruiz. Hi, Faye.
Hi, hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. And yourself?
I'm doing good. Good. Excited to
I
be here.
okay. So let's jump right in to the questions that I have for the short. Can you tell me how the idea um, for The Lights Are On, No One's Home came about? I'd love to know more about the creative process behind the development of the short.
Yeah, so the genesis of the project actually came while I was working on this other film for school. And we had finished shooting for the day and we were driving home and we were passing this bridge that was over the highway. That's like the bridge from the opening of the film. And as we were driving by, I noticed that they were tearing it down. And it made me really sad because I was like, that was a really cool bridge. I spent a lot of time there and I always thought it would be really cool, a really cool location in a movie. And so after I saw that, I feel like then I started to take more notice of the ways in which this neighborhood that I grew up in my entire life and still live in was changing and how it would continue to change and how maybe one day I would leave and return to find that none of it is similar to how I knew it at all.
Wow. And this is in Arizona, correct?
Yes, Tucson, Arizona.
Arizona. So I noticed that watching the short, memory, dysphoria, and displacement, tied to gentrification, seem to be themes that interest you as a filmmaker. You find yourself gravitating towards these themes in your other work, either past or upcoming projects that you have, and how have your thoughts on these themes evolved, if they have?
Yeah, I would definitely say that I am drawn to, memory and dysphoria and displacement, alienation is something that I'm definitely really into. I find that I feel like when I'm making films, I'm always returning to these things because I'm trying to maybe sort out how I feel about them or how I can create a stamp of how I feel about them in that time and how it might progress. Um, Memory especially is something that I really like to focus on and the way that we remember things and how that impacts our current life and how fantasy and memory intertwine with one another and the relationship between them.
Um, so I'm asking this next question because it's something I've been asked before about lingua franca. The short feels deeply personal and at the same time remarkably lived in and empathetic. But I'm curious how much of it is autobiographical. Your character's ruminations halfway through the film make it feel autobiographical. But then your character chooses the name Maribel in the final scene, and that's the name of the character's mother, which makes me think it's fiction. Um, so, is the blurry distinction between documentary and fiction by design? And I'll ask a follow-up question after you answer this one.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I mean, definitely the film does draw upon real emotion, I would say, that I've had, real thoughts and feelings that I've had as to how much of it is things that have actually happened. In some ways, not that much. And I feel like I'm really learning to embrace the kind of, yeah, blurry distinction between um it almost feels like a documentary and fiction at the same time. And I feel like part of that too is the like very specific perspective I chose with the film by like aligning us so closely to the point of view of this character. And so we're almost like following her through this like stream of consciousness, almost as if like shoot, like if you tried to like make a documentary out of like your memories or something like that.
Yeah. So my follow-up question is, in terms of the footage, how much of it is fiction, like something that you shot for the short, and how much of it is from your own personal heart, archive, like home videos or family photos, like for instance, the footage and the passage um, about the character's grandmother.
Yeah, some of the photos that we see in the film were like already things I had taken, and then I kind of, because trying to like build like this map of this neighborhood I found to be kind of overwhelming to do in terms of like scheduling. So I started to wonder about ways in which I could create like a geography of this space without, you know, making like the worst schedule for my crew possible. So I kind of fell back on like photos, and I started looking through photos I had and things I wanted to photograph that like had a special significance to me, that I was like, well, this might be gone one day. And like even some of the photos that we see in the film now, those places are different or they're changed in some way. Specifically the story about the Nana, the first house that we see, the like yellow and like blue one, actually is like the house that my Nana and Tata lived in for a long time. I like went there as like a baby and stuff. The follow-up house is like this other house that just had like a very striking resemblance to it, but it was like completely torn down. The photo that we see of the Nana is like a photo of my Nana, but it's like the story itself is like fictionalized. So it's like, again, that blurring of like my own life with this fictional world.
Right. And how did it feel kind of culling from your own personal life and personal archive? Did it make the process feel more cathartic or emotional in a way, or have you kind of had a certain emotional distance from that while you were making the film?
I mean, I would definitely say that culling from like, yeah, the stuff in my life definitely was a challenge in the sense that I feel like it put me like really close to it. And so I felt like I often had difficulty trying to separate myself like from the film in some ways. It was definitely helpful to have, other outside people to look at it with a more objective view. But in some ways, I thought it was cathartic because it, in some ways, was a reflection on feelings that I had had in the past or experiences that I had gone through that I felt like was it like a way of me confronting it in that moment and putting it to rest in some ways. So in that way, it was cathartic while also being kind of like suffocating at the same time.
I totally get that. I want to talk more about the lighting and the art direction. I thought the colors, you know, the light and pastel that you use quite striking and inspired, considering that the themes of the short are, rather somber
Mhm.
and melancholic. Can you tell us about that creative choice that you made?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I was going into it, because I chose to have this very closely aligned perspective with the character, that I wanted there to be no distinction between like the different timelines that we cross, or like a difference between the footage we shot and like the film photos. And so I kind of leaned on looking at the way in which like the disposable photos kind of looked, and used that as a way to kind of guide how everything would look, as well as like, we're like following her, like falling in and out of these memories. And I kind of wanted that sense of confusion, because it does all look like one unified timeline almost, if you didn't know, or like you had no context for it, right? um But yeah, I lost my train of thought, sorry.
Um, I want to talk about now a sense of time and chronology, you know, in your work, since you mentioned you kind of wanted that confusion is like deliberate or by design in terms of the linearity or the chronology of the events in the short. So what's your thinking or your approach, when it comes to chronology in your work as it relates to memory?
Right, and I think that I approach like memory and yeah, like time in a way that's like, at least for me, the way in which I experience those things, where it's like I can be present in a moment, but at any given moment, like a memory or a thought can like take me away. And then we like come back and it's like time has passed and maybe I'm like, down the street or in like a bar or something like that. So I think that that's how I go about approaching the themes of memory and time, is almost like the way in which most people, I would say, experience it.
Is this, notion or approach to time, is it something that was inspired by a work or a filmmaker that you've, studied or liked before, or
Um, None come off the top of my head. Maybe like, I don't know. I feel like maybe One Car Wide does it like a little bit. Like we just like, we kind of like move back and forth between like these storylines that are like taking place at the same time, but like, are showing up like later in the film and like things are revealed later. But I can't think of a specific reference for the approach that I took to time in the film.
noise? No, speaking of Wong Kar-wai, let's talk about cinematic influences that you do have.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Wong Kar-wai definitely is someone who is a big inspiration to me. I would say also Mati Diop is another one of my influences. Pedro Almodovar is definitely one, especially with the what we were speaking about earlier, the like this like bright, colorful art design with like paired with these like really serious or like somber themes is definitely something that I've always really enjoyed about his work. Um, the movie Tropical Malady, that
Yeah,
movie is like a big influence on me. I like find myself returning to it all the time.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, I would say those are my influences.
Um, yeah, I'm intrigued about Mati Diop. What specifically about her aesthetic or her work inspires and influences you?
I just find that she has like a really casually poetic nature about all her films. Like when Criterion like put all her shorts on there, I like binge all of them in like one night, and I really liked that it was like very simple scenes, very simple staging that you had to like read into to like find a meaning of, especially like Big in Vietnam, I thought was like something that really struck me when I first saw it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love her work too. And I was commissioned by Miu Miu to do a short for them. And mine
Oh
came out in
yes.
February. She was the one they commissioned right before I was. So that was
Oh
awesome.
yes. Yes, that's amazing.
I know that you went to is it the University of Tucson Film School? Am I right?
Arizona. It's a
Arizona.
University of Arizona. Yeah.
Um, can you tell us how your love affair with cinema started and how you know you decided to pursue filmmaking?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like it's funny because I feel like I almost fell into filmmaking. Like I kind of not like passively chose it, but I was like, well, film seems fun. Like I didn't know super much about it before I started, but I'm like, I love watching movies and I have lots of ideas. And before that, I did like dance for a long time. And was always really attracted to like several different arts, and I felt like, especially as a child, I was like really conflicted every time I was asked like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because I was like, well, I don't know, I want to like do all these different things. And what I feel like really attracts me to film is that it's like this culmination of so many different art forms that are all combining to build this one thing, which I think is really beautiful. And I also really love to work with people, collaborate with people, and I think there's a special kind of alchemy that can come from that environment.
Speaking of collaboration, since making a film is a collaborative effort, can you tell us about how you put the film together, like the resources and the crew that you gathered to make the short, the budget maybe, as maybe I'm just curious in terms of the production details that went into making it.
Right. So we shot the film over 2 weekends, one in November and one in at the very end of January, like right
This
before the
right before the pandemic. Okay.
yeah, so of 2020. And the crew mostly came from people I had went to school with, and or that I was going to school with at the time, and people who I had worked on my last short with in school. A lot of those people transferred over. I tried to keep it really light in terms of crew because it was like a very mobile set, and also the house we were shooting in was not super big. And it's also kind of like, in some ways, having a big crew, I feel like can sometimes, I don't know, with such an intimate material, can sometimes it can kind of get sucked out with it when there's like so many people like doing so many things at the same time. So I kind of wanted to keep it pared down in that way.
Yeah.
As far as the budget and stuff, most of it came from like school scholarships that the like semester before I was like typing furiously like all night to like turn in all these scholarships so that I could get all this like funding for the film. But what it ended up being, I don't even know, because at a certain point I was just like, just charge the card, just charge it.
Great. And of course, you wrote, directed, and starred in the film. What, you know, specific creative role did you enjoy, doing the most, and which one the least?
I think the one I enjoyed doing the most was probably directing it. Like I'm really like, I like to be on set, and I think that I always have like a very specific idea of like what I want from every scene, and like the
Mhm.
production design, like in the costumes, etc. And so I like to really get into the details of that.
Yeah.
Maybe the one that I feel like I enjoyed the least, only because it kind of clashed with the one that I liked the most, was acting, because in some ways I had to like relinquish control of being able to like see everything going on while it was being filmed.
Yeah.
But I still enjoyed it, but just for that specific clash, I kind of was like,
And how were you able to make that work? I mean, I totally understand, like, the horror and just the fear and anxiety of relinquishing that control while you're in front of the camera. And how were you able to kind of just make it work? I assume you had a truly wonderful and trusting relationship with your DP, as I
mhm.
did on my own.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think having the relationship I did with the camera department was definitely what helped me a lot. And also, I feel like at a certain point, I had to like create a boundary for myself. And it's like when I'm in front of the camera, I have to be present and in the scene, what's going on. And then after it ends, I can walk over and look at it and be like, okay, now it's like the director. So it was like just a challenge of taking off and putting on different hats.
Yeah. What other challenges did you encounter while making the short?
I would say definitely something that was difficult was maybe the scheduling of the film, just because it was like I wanted all the present day scenes to be shot at a very specific time period of the day, and it was like winter, so the sun went down at like 5, so we didn't really have so much time to shoot every scene, and we had to like go to different locations, so we were like constantly like losing time a little bit. um but I think after we had broke it up into the 2 weekends, we found it a lot easier to shoot everything that we
Hmm.
wanted to.
Okay. And what were some of the valuable, learnings and takeaways that you had while shooting the short?
I think that as with the short that I had did beforehand, what I learn every time is like trusting people and like being like, I chose this person to work with me because I trust them, and I have to actually trust them, like give over that, talking about like relinquishing control. And so I feel like with every project I'm learning to do that a little bit more so that I can fully invest myself into the role that I'm doing at the moment.
Great. I wanted to talk about, you know, one important thing that I learned as a filmmaker is that art and cinema, in our case specifically, how it's ultimately an emotional experience, that what the audience takes away when the film ends is not necessarily, the different plot points or the quirks and attributes of the character, but it's how your film made them feel. And is that emotional journey and destination something that you consciously and intentionally think about while making your work? Or, and if it is, what emotions did you want to evoke and elicit in the audience that's experiencing the short?
Hmm. I think that my intention, I feel like, changes like right up until I am shooting it, and even like in the editing, I feel like it for me it like continues to evolve until it's like done. And I feel like even after that, when I reflect and watch on it, I take different things from it slightly. But I think that with this short, maybe a takeaway that for me persists is just like the idea of like, even though things are really hard to let go of, like the character's like wandering through this neighborhood, and it's kind of thrown in her face that nothing is going to be the same. So why, would the house still be there? Why would your mom still be there? But she's like still holding on to this fantasy. And at the end, when she's confronted with it and it all starts to sink in, there's like a moment of like feeling that loss. But then before, when she calls out for approval of her name, that the voice that she hears back is herself, is kind of a moment where it's like, even though you feel like everything is lost, like the forgiveness and all the other things that you were looking for in your return are gone, that you can still move on and live your life, and you can still give yourself the things that, especially I feel like as trans women, trans people, that I feel like we're often denied in some senses. And I feel like it's really important to cultivate a sense of being able to give yourselves, or give yourselves within a community, the things that we maybe have been deprived of.
Um, I want to ask this because it's also been something that I've been asked. What are your thoughts of being, you know, identified or labeled as a queer filmmaker? Is it something that you want to be known as, or do you feel that it's restrictive and reductive of your art and your filmmaking practice?
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, in some ways, I think I would like to embrace it. I think that in some settings, that kind of language is maybe used in like a, yeah, like a way to box someone in, or kind of used in maybe more of a pejorative sense, or like a, like that's just like queer cinema. But I feel like, I don't know if I necessarily find the label to be restricting. I kind of just want to be like, I make the work that I make, and if it falls within this, then it falls within it, you know?
How would you describe your aesthetic if you're made to describe it in like a few sentences?
Oh, that's kind of hard. I would say it's definitely like soft and light and colorful and a little bit muddied in terms
Mhm.
of like at least the visual quality. I like to always add like a layer of like grain or like something that takes away a little bit from like this super clear image that we're seeing.
Mhm.
So I think I would definitely describe it as that.
Yeah, that wasn't so hard, and that was a great description.
Yeah, yeah, it was when I got down to it.
Um, so, in terms of the things that you're drawn to, which some of which we've touched on, memory dysphoria and alienation. What other themes do you feel impelled towards, and that you want to explore?
I feel like I'm really attracted to like history and
Mhm.
specifically like forgotten histories or histories that have been erased or histories that are categorized by something that is not necessarily like, in a textbook, like, mythological histories and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I find myself really attracted to like, I spend a lot of time in like trans archives, like looking through different like historical like zines and like photos and like these scrapbooks that people would make. And what always struck me about those is the ways in which there's like always these gaps that are within them.
Yeah.
And it almost feels like sometimes archives are archiving what is not there rather than what is actually there. And I think that that kind of space is sad because it like obviously is a reflection of like either a lack of recording or a deliberate erasure of it. But also I feel like there is maybe a freedom in that, in the sense that it's like that's where fantasy can come in to imagine the things that might have filled the space or things that could. And so I feel like that is something that maybe in my future work I want to lean into, that's this idea of like histories that have these gaps, and with the stuff that you do have, you start to pull these small details that suddenly carry like so much more weight because it's like all you have to like go off of to like create these fantasies around.
And that leads us to my final question. What can we expect in terms of new work from Faye Ruiz?
I think right now, well, speaking of history, right now I'm like kind of doing research on like the in my neighborhood, it's like split. My neighborhood like splits the Santa Cruz River, and it's like this river that once used to run for a really long time, like it just ran with water, and now it's like completely dry, and it's kind of this like really intensely history laden zone of like all these different um just like so many different things have taken place there, and it's been used as a resource like from like a very long time ago. Like indigenous people used to use it for farming and fishing, and like then it got dried out and people like grew weed in there, I guess, and used it as like a junkyard, and now it's kind of just like this place where plants like overgrow. And so I've been really drawn to that lately and trying to explore making something that is centered around that.
Wonderful. I can't wait to see it when it's done.
Yes, yes.
And on that note, I would like to thank Faye for joining me this conversation and for making such um, incredible short with The Lights Are On, No One's Home, which is part of Dedza Films' shorts anthology, Who Will Start Another Fire.
Yes, thank you for watching the short and for taking the time to talk to me. I had a really nice time talking with you.
Thank you, and looking forward to your upcoming work.
Yes, you as well, you as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.